Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Judith Bell, and I'm the Vice President of Programs here at the San Francisco Foundation. Joining me today are Kay Fernandez-Smith, the Assistant Vice President of Programs, Francesca Vitor, Senior Director of our People Pathway, Expanding Access to Opportunity, Landon Williams, Senior Director of our Place Pathway, Anchoring Communities, and Myra Chow, Director of our Power Pathway, Nurturing Equity Movements. I'm sure you're all eager to know how we'll spend the time on the call, and I'm mindful that you want to be able to report back to your development teams, your boards, and others about specifics in terms of our grant-making strategy to advance racial and economic equity across the region. On our first call in July, we gave a high-level view of our strategy. During our calls in September, we dove deeper and provided you with up-to-date information on our grant-making strategy. Today, we want to focus on our Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building, which launches tomorrow, November 17th, and our program guidelines associated with our open cycle for our core equity grant making, which launches in January. But first, I want to begin what is on all of our minds, last week's election results. This election is a game changer for the nation. We, along with many others in philanthropy, are actively figuring out how the election will be a game changer for us. Clearly, the election brought the need for our equity agenda for greater racial and economic inclusion into high relief. We are more dedicated and more confident of the need for all of us to work together with you, our partners, allies, leaders, and residents. So today we will announce a couple of immediate steps we are taking with our grant making. But we view these as just the first steps, and we will need your thoughts and ideas about other steps we should be taking in terms of our grant making and also our role as civic leaders. During this time, we need to bolster ourselves, our colleagues, and the broader community to confirm our humanity, our kindness, and the need to support and protect everyone in our communities, across the region, across the state, and across the nation. To be more specific, we know that we will need to stand with and be in support of Muslims and others who may be victims of Islamophobia. We will need to double down on what it means to be a sanctuary city when there are calls to stop federal funds or to start mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. And we will need to stand with other communities, whether it be the LGBTQ community, people of color, or women. We know this is a call to action, and we are working to answer that call in the best and most effective ways possible. At the same time, we need to remember that Bay Area residents spoke too. Voters in our cities, counties, and the state sent out a different message on election night. We had amazing wins in housing and in preserving resources for education, health care, and other vital services, and in juvenile justice. A day after the election, we were inspired by the action we saw on all levels, from politicians to community leaders to foundation executives. The way our communities are coming together is testament to the importance of continuing to be part of building a region of greater inclusion and greater equity. Not surprisingly, post-election, there are many questions. What do the election results mean for philanthropy and for community foundations? How will we respond as the federal administration proposes and moves forward with changes that will deeply impact our communities in terms of housing, in terms of infrastructure, tax equity, immigration, etc.? The reality is how we work to achieve our goals could be impacted, especially for foundations working on progressive equity agendas. We will respond accordingly to continue to advance racial and economic inclusion in the Bay Area. California has a long history of being at the forefront of change. Anthony Thigpen, President of California Calls, reminded us, our work is one chapter in the long history of movements for civil rights, for economic equality, women's rights, inclusion, and authentic democracy. And while not automatic or guaranteed, the arc of history is on our side. We have begun reaching out to the faith leaders who are part of our faith network, to those in the immigrant rights movement, and to others to help us know what they are thinking will be needed. As I said earlier, we encourage you to let us know your thoughts and ideas as challenges emerge. One step we are taking immediately in response to the election is the launch of the Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building. We want to ensure that those who are most impacted by emerging issues and challenges have the resources they need to respond in a timely and effective manner. A I'm going to turn it over now to Myra to share details on the Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building.
Thank you, Judith. Again, as Judith said, now more than ever, movement leaders need the resources to take immediate action to respond to critical opportunities or challenges that advance racial and economic equity in the Bay Area. Recognizing this urgent need, the Foundation is excited to launch a Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building. Our goal with the fund is to support movement leaders as they seek to build the political and community power of low-income and people of color. We're excited to post the guidelines this Thursday, I guess that's tomorrow, and it will be an ongoing grant-making cycle. So you can submit applications at any time, and you can both apply for the Rapid Response Fund as well as submit an application for Stage 1 in January with the open cycle that my colleagues will be describing in more detail. The fund will provide one-time grants in the range of $3,000 to $15,000, and we expect grant decisions to be made within 30 days. Priority will be given to requests from small, emerging, or new grassroots efforts, including those from faith-based groups or fiscally sponsored projects. Proposals must respond to an unexpected moment or opportunity for advocacy or mobilization that advances racial and economic equity at a neighborhood, city, county, or regional level. We are not looking to fund nonprofit organization challenges such as the sudden loss of funding or the resignation of an executive director. Here are just a few examples of what we could consider funding, but we look forward to reading your applications and learning what you see are the needs from the community. One example, in the wake of the recent election, organizations might propose to create safe spaces for strategizing, community building, and healing. Or, as we have heard from the President-elect, there was a pledge to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program and conduct large-scale deportations. In response, immigrant rights organizations could propose to conduct a series of Know Your Rights sessions for the community. Or, if there is a racially charged event, such as the Oscar Grant shooting, community leaders could request funding to meet and strategize a response. We are pleased to launch this time-sensitive grant-making opportunity. And now I'd like to turn it back to Judith.
Great, thanks, Myra. And we'll have an opportunity later to answer any questions you have about the Rapid Response Fund for Movement. So before we discuss the rest of the guidelines for the upcoming open cycle, I want to remind everyone about our agenda to advance racial and economic equity in the region. Many of you were on our last two calls in July and September and are already grantees of the Foundation, so I'll be speaking briefly about the Foundation's equity agenda. As we described to you during our call in July, in developing our agenda, we reached out and connected with community, civic, business, and elected leaders across the region. We reviewed data, and we listened to your views on the opportunities and the challenges we are facing and the roles that we here at the San Francisco Foundation could play to make the region a stronger and more equitable place for everyone. We announced our deepening commitment to expand opportunities and inclusions for struggling communities and people of color across the Bay Area. We've always had a regional footprint. Now we have a regional agenda. And we have been committed to social justice since the Foundation was launched, but now we are building upon that history with our agenda to achieve greater racial and economic equity. Across the region, we need to ensure that everyone has a chance to get a good job, live in a safe and affordable home, have a strong political voice, and can live in a community that provides real access to opportunity. This is the vision of our equity agenda and what we aim to achieve by supporting people, place, and power. Our programmatic work, including our initiatives and projects, are now aligned under these three equity pathways: people, place, and power. People being about a focus on expanding access to opportunity, place about focusing on anchoring communities, and power about a focus on nurturing equity movements. Now I'd like to talk about the open grant cycle for our core equity grant making centered on our people, place, and power pathway. We have one door to a suite of grant opportunities. Any 501c3 nonprofit is welcome to apply and does not need to be invited. Applicants can apply for a grant for 1 to 3 years, and grant ranges for each of the pathways will be from $30,000 to $100,000. And just to let you know, we're only going to be able to provide the top of the range for a select number of proposals. We'll post the guidelines and the application for our core equity grant making the week of December 5th. As Myra mentioned, the guidelines for the Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building will be available this Thursday. That's tomorrow. In January, we'll accept the first stage of the application process for this open cycle under one common grant application. This will be, as I mentioned, one door to a suite of equity-focused opportunities, including grants from each of our pathways and from an overarching pool for innovation and support for smaller and new organizations. You'll be able to request support across different pathways if that seems appropriate for your work. An internal grants review committee will determine the organizations that will be invited to submit full proposals. Those invited to submit those full proposals will also be notified which pathway their grants opportunity will be primarily connected to, and will also be connected to a foundation staff person as their contact. We know that part of the process is about building relationships, and we want to make sure that we help you build and maintain those connections to staff. Moreover, with the restructuring of the program department to reflect our equity agenda, there are new staff to get to know and to work with. Once the proposals have been submitted, they will be reviewed and final decisions will be made. We expect to issue grant funds in May. So what are we looking to fund? I'm going to turn it over now to Francesca to speak about the People Pathways guidelines and funding priorities for the open cycle in January, and then we'll hear from the other directors with additional information about the other pathways after that. Francesca?
Good afternoon. I'm Francesca Vitor, Senior Director for Expanding Access to Opportunity here at the San Francisco Foundation, or in shorthand, the People Pathway. From childhood, most of us dream about what we want to be when we grow up and what kind of home we want to live in. We believe that we will have the resources we need to live a good life, feel safe, and provide for our families. These are basic human aspirations that we all share. But as the economy and population has grown in the Bay Area, not everyone has benefited from the job growth or economic development, and few have realized their childhood dreams. In fact, many haven't benefited at all, and some are worse off. Thousands of Bay Area residents no longer earn enough money to live in our increasingly expensive region. Furthermore, income inequality between low and high-wage workers is increasing. Wages are growing for top earners and shrinking at the bottom. Fewer and fewer people have the middle-class incomes necessary to comfortably meet their needs, and the region is no longer increasing the number of middle-wage jobs. And while people of color are leading the population growth, and are now the majority in the Bay Area, they are more likely to be in poverty and among the working poor, face higher levels of unemployment, and earn significantly less than their white counterparts. Immigrants also face challenges getting jobs and building economic stability because of lack of documentation, language differences or bias, and formerly incarcerated have difficulty accessing a good job or affordable home because of their criminal records. This combination of rising inequality, stagnant wages, and persistent racial and economic inequities are placing the Bay Area's long-term economic future at risk. The People Pathway is seeking to expand access to opportunity by tackling the inequities in our criminal justice, education, and immigration systems, while at the same time investing in the necessary training, skill building, and employment opportunities for those facing the greatest barriers to a good job. We also recognize that reliable public transit access and resilient infrastructure are not only essential to accessing opportunity in our region, but hold the promise of providing good jobs and meaningful careers. We also want to help improve the lives of those who have been most shut out of opportunity. For this open cycle, priority will be given to projects and programs that remove barriers and expand opportunities for the following 4 populations: immigrants, opportunity youth, low-wage workers, and those who are formerly incarcerated. Here are the goals for the People Pathway to expand access to opportunity and remove systemic barriers. First goal is to increase access to job opportunities and career pathways. Second is remove barriers to student success in our education system. Third is reduce mass incarceration, reduce recidivism, and reform our criminal justice system. And fourth is improve public transit systems and increase and target infrastructure jobs. We've also identified 4 priority funding areas for the open grant cycle in January. First is good jobs. This funding area will support organizations and programs that expand access to jobs and economic opportunities, with priority given to applicants that focus in the following areas. Career pathways. We are looking for proposals that will help put people on a pathway to a good job. This might include basic skills development, education, mentorship, and career advancement strategies. Quality jobs. Everyone deserves a quality job so they can afford to stay in the Bay Area. We will support efforts that increase wages and benefits, provide a safe and fair work environment, improve benefits, and provide opportunity for career advancement and economic independence. Social enterprises. We want to support the social enterprises that hire, place, and support low-wage workers and those facing the most barriers to employment. Second will be the area of education equity. This funding area will support organizations and programs that remove barriers in the education system. We are looking for creative, innovative, or proven solutions that advance education equity from pre-K through 12th grade. Priority will be given to applicants that focus in the following areas. First, school climate. We will fund efforts that decrease both suspension rates in schools and chronic absenteeism, that shift school climate to improve student outcomes, such as restorative justice practices and removing implicit bias, and that promote parent-student engagement in the classroom. We will also give priority to school finance, where we hope to fund advocacy and organizing geared toward more public funding for under-resourced, underperforming school districts in the Bay Area. This may include advocacy for more state funding or work for more local funding for our school districts and schools. Third is criminal justice reform. We're excited to seek proposals that will help us build out our new work in the criminal justice arena to reduce the number of people of color entering the criminal and juvenile justice systems, reallocate prison spending to support programs that prevent incarceration and reduce recidivism, and increase job opportunities for the formerly incarcerated. Priority will be given to applicants that focus in the following areas. Fair criminal justice policies to reduce incarceration and recidivism. Bail and fee reform to reduce financial burdens on the formerly incarcerated and their families. Reentry programs and services that provide workforce training, education initiatives, and housing services to put formerly incarcerated individuals on the path to success. And data transparency and funding reallocation to promote the collection and utilization of data and the reallocation of prison funding for reentry services. Transit and infrastructure is our fourth area. This funding area will support efforts to improve public transit, support resilient infrastructure development, and expand access to infrastructure jobs. We will prioritize public transit funding to fund policy advocacy efforts that will increase public transit funding to benefit people who rely on transit or people who lack access to transit. Affordable transit work, which will reduce the cost of transit through no-cost or low-cost fares and other strategies. And we will support efforts that identify and develop job opportunities in the clean energy economy and or the construction of infrastructure to ensure that low-income communities and people of color are trained for and can access the clean, sustainable jobs of the future. I will be available to answer your questions later in the webinar. For now, let me turn it over to my colleague, Landon.
Thanks, Francesca. This is Landon Williams. I'm Senior Director for Anchoring Communities, which we also call the PLACE pathway. So our communities are places that anchor us and provide connections to opportunity, services, and safety. They offer the social, cultural, spiritual, and economic networks that support and sustain us. Across the Bay Area, there's a collective sense that the accelerating economy is not benefiting all residents, leaving many feeling vulnerable about their housing, their community, and their future. Communities need new affordable housing, jobs, and parks, and art that speaks to local cultures. Community residents and leaders are joining with small businesses, faith leaders, elected officials, and nonprofit institutions to work in partnership to craft their future. We need equitable development so that communities can grow without forcing out long-time residents out of their homes, while at the same time providing a welcoming place for newcomers. In some places, there are particular windows of opportunity to advance equity, places where economic changes and planned investments are bringing residents and leaders together to determine how they can revitalize and improve their communities and remain there in the community to enjoy the benefits of those efforts. Other places are seeking to spark new plans or push for policies to bring a brighter future for current and new residents. The PLACE pathway, anchoring communities, has two goals that are supported by strategies that help us to achieve those goals. Our first goal is to prevent the displacement of up to 230,000 families, containing as many as 1 million low-income and people of color from the Bay Area, and ensure that our diverse neighborhoods are places where all residents can live, work, feel welcome, and thrive. Our strategies are to increase the supply and production of new affordable housing. We know that for decades, the region has underproduced enough affordable housing to keep up with demand. So this strategy is to increase resources for affordable housing production. The second strategy is because we know that it takes time to gather together the financing, the development teams, site control, and construction expertise to build new housing, our second strategy has to be one that stabilizes existing affordable housing so individuals and families can remain in their homes and the region can preserve every unit of existing affordable housing that we can. Another strategy is to protect tenants from predatory rent increases and no-fault eviction. We've had impressive wins on this strategy during the recent election, but now we have to follow up and step up. We have to ensure that the potential gains are enforced. We also have to press forward in other jurisdictions for tenant protections. Another strategy is to advance equitable development throughout the region wherever we can to ensure that everyone is benefiting from growth. The last strategy in this goal is to stabilize small businesses and nonprofit organizations that provide the local jobs, goods, and services in their neighborhoods. The second place goal is to preserve the racial and cultural identity of Bay Area neighborhoods. And it's that racial and cultural diversity and identity that many of us came to the Bay Area to enjoy. So our strategies are first to increase the capacity of arts and culture and faith-based neighborhood anchors to build social cohesion and nurture a sense of belonging, amplify the voices of the people, preserve the rich cultural heritage and legacy of neighborhoods and the region, and to build connections and understanding between diverse racial, economic, and social economic groups. Our next strategy is to support neighborhood efforts to improve the vibrancy of local communities. And then the final strategy there is to ensure that policies protect and reflect community values and assets, and that they support the racial and cultural identity of the neighborhood. Before I close, I want to just give you a couple of examples of what we mean when we say mobilize place-informed culture and arts. So during October and November, San Francisco-based Galleria de la Raza used its cultural space and outreach activities in the East and West Bay to bring together people at cultural activities where artists presented their works that highlighted the issue of displacement and the need to strengthen grassroots leadership and civic participation. In Oakland, on the other side of the bay, Eastside Arts Alliance presented cultural programs which had a similar content and created messaging to shift the predominant narrative and engage local residents. Those are but two of those examples that I want you to at least get a sense of what we mean. I now look forward to reviewing the first stage of the application, and I'll turn it over to Myra.
Thank you, Landon. Again, this is Myra Chow. I'm the Director of Nurturing Equity Movements, or what I like to tell my family, the POWER pathway. Given the recent election rising income and wealth inequality, and the ongoing underrepresentation of low-income and people of color in the political and policy process, we see the critical importance of supporting movements that grow the voice and influence of those left out of decision-making. We also firmly believe that effective movements for social change have always been and must continue to be led by those most directly impacted by inequity. For decades, we have played an important role in leadership development and movement building more broadly, including making grants for community organizing, helping to start and sustain community organizations, and supporting grassroots leadership development. Going forward, we seek to continue and deepen this work through our Power Pathway. The overall goal of the Power Pathway is to build power to ensure a strong political and community voice for all through 5 main strategies. First, we hope to strengthen organizations that engage in constituent-led community organizing to grow the power and voice of low-income residents, people of color, youth, and immigrants. Second, we want to support coalitions that strengthen the ecosystem of community organizing and movement building across the region. Third, we aim to expand civic engagement, including integrated voter engagement, to ensure a diverse, representative electorate and the votes needed to win equity campaigns. Fourth, our goal is to promote the development of grassroots community and civic leaders in low-income communities and communities of color. And lastly, we want to support movement building through data, research, and communication. For the upcoming open cycle in January, the Power Pathway will focus on 2 strategies: support for community organizing and support for coalitions that aggregate power across race, ethnicity, geography, and issue areas. The guidelines will go into more detail, but in summary, the goal of our grant making will be to first build community power and voice by supporting and strengthening the capacity of local organizing, including faith-based groups that are constituent-led and build the power and voice of their base. Second, we hope to strengthen coalitions, supporting efforts that build the ecosystem of community organizing and movement building across the region. Now more than ever, we need to resource coalition and alliances to promote collaboration and enhance their collective impact. And we hope to grow the organizing field by supporting new organizing efforts that address population and geographic gaps. For example, because low-income people of color have been displaced to the suburbs where there is less community organizing capacity, we would like to give priority to community-led efforts in areas outside the urban core. I, too, am excited to read the applications that will come in January. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kay.
The San Francisco Foundation has had a long history of seeding new coalitions, programs, and organizations, and that won't change. In keeping with our legacy, we plan on awarding grants to support new and innovative approaches that have the potential to advance racial and economic equity in the Bay Area. And these efforts include seeding new projects, programs, organizations, and coalitions that break with existing practices in driving towards the outcomes of our people, place, and power pathways. Investing in innovative approaches runs across our entire core equity grant making, and we want to encourage those of you to apply, even if your organizations have operating budgets that are $1 million or below. Community leaders and organizations are powerful change agents, and we want to support the capacity and the tools that you'll need to implement new ideas or those innovations that advance racial and economic equity. So I wanted to lift that up for you as part of the work that we're doing in focusing on innovative approaches to equity. But as Judith shared earlier, we as a community foundation are even more acutely aware of the sense of urgency. The recent election was a game changer, and we've started to hear from organizations and community leaders that they'll need flexible resources to quickly respond, but also to have planning dollars to change their advocacy and service strategies that they were already planning on implementing, and to figure out how to best meet the needs of our diverse communities. And for foundations, what we fund, and for now, how we operate, may have to adapt to address the pressing issues such as the legal services for civil rights, bolstering internal organizational capacity for digital safety, and many other issues that we know you are still determining as we wait to see what political and policy realities unfold in the coming months. With that in mind, we're going to shift a portion of the dollars that we had earmarked for innovation to bolster our work in the Power Pathway that's focused on community organizing, allyship, and forging alliances. This is a slight shift from having a separate innovation fund as we described on our September call, but we feel that the times merit this shift. We want to hear from you, our partners and allies, about the steps you'll be taking to change course or shift those strategies so that our grant-making guidelines can support and reflect those efforts at this time. As you process and work within your organization and with your community partners, please continue to share your thoughts and ideas with us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kay. Before I open it up to questions, and I am going to do that, I wanted to take a minute to review how to apply. The first stage of the application, which will be submitted online, will happen in January. Beforehand, please read the grant guidelines. They'll be available on our website. That's www.ss.org, the week of December 5th. Review the PDF version of the application before completing your first stage. Submit any questions along the way about the guideline or the applications to us at programs@sss.org. That's programs@sss.org. And review the open cycle timeline submissions to be clear about the deadline for you and your organization. Then you will submit the first stage of the application, and this will get you going in the full application process. We'll be using WebEx to answer all your questions. Type your question into the box provided, send your question to panelists, and then we're going to attempt to answer as many of your questions as possible during the remaining time for the webinar. Also, if you have questions following this webinar, again, please submit them to programs@sss.org. So we've already gotten some of your questions. We want to dive in to answer them. And the first question is whether organizations based outside of the Bay Area can apply if they're engaged in a project in a Bay Area county. And the answer to that is yes. If you're outside the Bay Area, as long as you are working in one of the 5 counties for the San Francisco Foundation, that's Marin, San Francisco, San Mateo, and the East Bay, Alameda, and Contra Costa, you are eligible to apply. Then we've had a few questions about whether you need to apply to one or whether you can apply to all the pathways. And the answer to that is that, as I mentioned, there's one door to the suite of opportunities. You will not need to designate one pathway or multiple pathways, although you can. You can apply across or in one pathway. The grant range is the same. It's $30,000 to $100,000, and it's from 1 to 3 years, and that's the amount per year. Kay, I want to ask you to answer a question here. Which is that if an organization doesn't have a previous funding relationship with the foundation, will their application be considered only after all current and past grantees are considered?
There is no priority that's going to be given for current or past grantees of the San Francisco Foundation. So we want everybody to come in and have equal footing to apply for this open cycle.
Great. And now a question here is if we have different projects, can we submit an application focused on each? And actually you cannot. We're asking organizations to just submit one application. It can in fact span different projects. but one application with those limits of $30,000 to $100,000 per year, 1 to 3 years, and that's what we'll be considering. Now, if you are the chair of a coalition or you're a member of a coalition, you can be included in other proposals, but for your organizational work, we're accepting one proposal per organization.
And I just wanted to add, Judith, we actually got that feedback very clearly from our listening sessions and from grantees and our stakeholders. Many of the organizations said that they would like larger grants, more multi-year grants, and also grants that support core operations. And so this really is a shift to be able to be responsive to those growing needs.
Great. And then also we had a question about whether or not after this first stage, some will be asked to submit full proposals, and yes, that's exactly how it'll work. You submit with the first stage, and then we'll do the internal review, and we'll be asking some of those folks then to follow up with full proposals from there. Another question that is in the category of sort of better understanding the open cycle is whether or not public agencies are eligible to apply in this cycle. And yes, public agencies are eligible to apply provided they have either a 501c3 or a fiscal sponsor that will allow them to be eligible. And then we have a question, Kay, if you could take this one, also about whether or not general support requests have to go through the same process.
Yes, the general support requests do, again, go through this one-door application, and it will be then reviewed by our internal review committee to determine which one of the pathways or multiple pathways that it touches upon. Again, you'll have the option once you look at the guidelines and start your application to determine if you know your work falls squarely in one or more of the pathways. However, you do not have to do that. We really want to make sure that as we're moving into this work and know that there's a lot of intersections, that our internal review committee will help to determine which pathway your application fits best.
Great. We have a number of questions about whether or not the PowerPoint will be made available afterwards, and it will be posted on our website. Again, that's www.sff.org, and also a recording of both the presentation tied to the webinar and this back and forth with questions we posted. And then we're going to take both the questions we're answering now, ones that we may not be able to cover and one that you're going to send to us, and post some frequently asked questions. And then again, if you have questions that aren't answered either in the webinar or the PowerPoint or in the frequently asked questions, you can continue to send them to us at programs@sff.org. We did have one other question related to submitting proposals, and that was if you're an organization with multiple locations, which one should you use? Just use the location of your central office for submitting based on those rolling deadlines. Myra, we have a few questions here about the Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building that I'd like to ask you to answer. The first is, I know you mentioned this, but just to highlight again, whether you can apply for both rapid response and the open cycle.
And the answer is yes. And again, the rapid response will be an ongoing grant-making program.
And if you apply for rapid response, will that jeopardize you in terms of putting in an application in the open cycle?
No, and we're really looking in rapid response those immediate needs that need to be addressed within a fairly short period, and that's there's urgency to that request for funding.
Okay, great. And then one other question is whether or not we have a sense of how many grants will be allocated on the rapid response.
We don't have a sense. You know, we hope to, you know, entertain as many requests that make sense. So we don't have a specific number.
Right. And we will continue to issue grants until we run out of funds, as long as we can. Francesca, we have a couple questions in the people pathway. Under the school climate category, do you require a program to have been in the schools for some time, or can this be a relatively new program being introduced in the schools?
It can be a relatively new program. As Kay spoke to, innovative ideas are welcome. We would like some assurance that it will be set up for success and has potential for success, but we're also looking for proven and demonstrated models that can really remove the systemic barriers in the education system.
Okay. Landon, there's a question here about the PLACE pathway. And you were talking about how a priority strategy is to stabilize existing affordable housing. And we have a question that is, does that include housing owned by low-income African Americans who are at particular risk of losing their homes, or is the priority only nonprofit-owned rental housing?
So that, there's two parts to that answer. The first one is that since we are a foundation, we fund nonprofit organizations, so we can't fund an individual. In terms of whether or not that nonprofit might also be focused on supporting housing owned by low-income African Americans, the answer is that's yes, it could, but that's up to the nonprofit that applies.
Great. Two questions here that I want to be sure we answer. One is, can you apply for $100,000 per year for 3 years for a total of $300,000? The answer to that is yes. And then the other is, will the grants primarily be to support core operations or to support specific projects? And here I want to be clear that even for grants that are core support, we'll be looking for outcomes that are tied to our equity agenda. So whether or not you're asking for support for a specific project or you're asking for core-oriented support, we're still going to be asking you to give us some outcomes that make clear to us how it's tied to advancing our agenda for greater economic and racial inclusion across the region. And then we have a question here about the place category. And Landon, I wonder if you could talk some about whether or not community efforts to bridge racial strife figure into the place pathway.
Yes is the answer. It definitely does figure into the place pathway. In fact, we realize that it is by uniting together rather than having inter-ethnic conflicts that we can become a stronger force. And we've in fact funded a anti-displacement coalition in San Francisco that includes Asians, African Americans, Latinos, gays, straights, and some seniors.
Great, thank you. We have a question here about can multiple groups with the same fiscal sponsor apply multiple times? The answer is yes. So we don't, if you have a fiscal sponsor, as many projects that are under that umbrella can apply. And then we have a question about whether or not some of the proposed work can impact state policy. And the answer is yes, particularly the work that is tied to some of the priorities you've heard us mention. And Francesca, here's a question for you that's also related to that. Under the education equity goal, are we focused on any level of education, elementary versus high school, or does it run the gamut?
It runs the gamut. We'll even be looking at early education. We know how important that is to really start early in addressing these barriers that are preventing students from learning.
Okay, and then, Kay, I wonder if you could answer this question. Can organizations with budgets under $1 million apply for people, place, and power grants, or are they in some other separate pot?
Again, there's not going to be a separate application for an innovation fund. We really will be, we wanted to just encourage organizations who do have budgets under $1 million to apply. Again, one door for a suite of opportunities. So if you apply in January and you have an innovative approach, idea, or a new organization that are helping to meet the goals of either the people, place, or power pathway, we want you to come in.
Great. Two questions. Myra, I'm going to ask you to take this one. Will media projects be considered? Can you answer that just as you think about power in that context?
Yes, absolutely. We're looking at communication strategies that help change the narrative and build a collective vision for the future. So as much as media projects would do that, yes. if they target and advance our racial and economic agenda.
Great. And then we have a question about if you're an active grantee currently, can you still apply? Absolutely, you can apply. We encourage both current grantees as well as those who are new to the foundation to apply under the open cycle or under the rapid response fund for movement building as well. Then we have a question about whether collaboratives of organizations can apply together, and they certainly can. Again, one organization will need to be designated as the recipient of the funds, but we definitely encourage folks, and as you heard Myra talk about, one of the priorities in the power pathway is, in fact, to encourage coalitions and new alliance building. Kay, I'm going to ask you to answer this question. Will you be prioritizing new pilot projects, and will you also be supporting existing programs provided they are innovative and impactful?
We definitely will be open to receiving applications for both new pilot projects as well as supporting existing programs that have innovative and impactful approaches.
Okay, and two questions. One is about whether or not, if your organization runs programs in different counties, should we submit a different application for each county? No. Your organization submits one. The county should be where you're headquartered. That's when you should submit. Not to worry about this in terms of the schedule. We're really looking just to stagger our applications. And you certainly can ask us for advice, but the big question is just to submit in the time frame. And then we have a question here about for basic skills and for vocational ed, this will be for you, Francesca, and for job mentorship and placement, is there a specific age group that this funding is targeting?
We are really looking at opportunity youth, and again, the populations that we are seeking to serve in this upcoming cycle are immigrants and reentry and low-wage workers. So the age range for youth will be, the opportunity youth age, which is those students who are out of school or out of work in the 18 to 24-year-old range. But we'll also be looking at those other populations for job mentorship and placement opportunities.
Great, thanks. We have a number of questions about amounts and about multi-year and single year, and so I'm just going to walk people through it one more time, make sure that we're clear. And again, this will be posted when the guidelines go up the week of December 5th. You'll see this again. But just to be clear, the grant amounts run from $30,000 to $100,000 per year, and you can apply for 1 to 3 years. So it could be a single-year grant you're requesting, could be a multi-year grant that you're requesting, and you can, in fact, apply for up to a total of $300,000, right? That'd be $100,000 per year for 3 years. And again, just to stress here, Kay was mentioning earlier how these funding parameters really are in response to what we heard earlier when we were really thinking through our equity agenda, and that was a request to us to make larger grants, to make more multi-year grants, and to do what we could to be more focused around core support. And so these really are oriented to really meet those requests. And as a result, our average grant size is going to be bigger, and it will mean that overall we'll be making fewer grants. But we think that they will now really allow you to better meet your goals, to better advance bigger agendas, and ultimately for all of us to be more effective. And that, again, you will all see when the guidelines get posted the week of December 5th. Let's see. Let me also answer some other questions. As you think, Landon, this is for you, as you think through the criteria that you'll be using to determine the efficacy of a nonprofit in terms of providing local jobs or goods or services in a particular neighborhood, how do you think about those criteria?
Well, there are a number of things that we look at. I mean, one, of course, is the capacity of the organization. What's its history been? What's the staff like? We look at it's also its financial capabilities. So we'd want to see audits if it's an organization that's been around that long. And also what we want to see is, what kind of outcomes have you achieved? How many people have been served and how have they been served?
Great. So we just have a little bit of time. I just want to encourage folks to put your questions in and submit them, and we'll continue to answer them. And again, you can do that in the WebEx box and indicate that it's coming to panelists. Myra, here's a question for you. Is the rapid response, are the rapid response funding guidelines also going up the week of December 5th? When will we be able to see them?
Hopefully tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We're all committed to that.
So the application and the guidelines will be up on our website, and the guidelines will also be in Spanish.
And the application will be there as well. And again, just to remind everybody, our website is www.sff.org. Kay, here's a question for you. What if an organization's budget is over $1 million? Are they still able and encouraged to apply, and does it decrease your chances?
Yes, if you are an organization that has a budget over $1 million, we do encourage you to apply. You still will be eligible.
Terrific. Okay, so let's see. Here's a question. Francesca, maybe you can answer this one. Would direct legal services for immigrants fall under the people pathway?
Well, again, there will be one door for people to apply to and come through, and we are looking for projects that will advance all three of our pathways. That said, yes, that would be something in the people pathway that we would absolutely consider, especially in this time after the election, where we know that there's going to probably be an increased need for legal services for immigrants.
Great. And I'm reminded to let you all know both the website, which I've said, www.sff.org, and to look for the link, which is Grantmaking, and that's where you'll find the information that we've been talking about. Francesca, also, will we be considering health, mental health, or any other kind of direct health services as part of the open cycle?
We will not in this open cycle.
Great. Okay. Now let's see. What about performing arts? That's long been an important part of the movement for social justice, and do we envision supporting arts in the future? Landon, you want to start, and then Myra, you may want to jump in.
Okay, so arts is squarely in the place pathway. We see arts as an anchor institution in a neighborhood. I tried to give a couple of examples during the guidelines of arts organizations that we've funded. So short answer is yes, and it's squarely in our pipeline. And one thing, I guess I didn't really talk about performing arts. So if I use an example from my own background, this is during the divestment issue in South Africa, and I'll try to be quick. Some folks couldn't quite understand why it was important, but there was this theatrical piece called Serafina, and it was about the young people in South Africa fighting against apartheid. And I think that when that played in the United States, it changed the narrative in many people's mind and brought out much more support. So to me, that's an example of performing arts, but art in the eyes of artists too.
Mm-hmm. And just briefly, in the Power Pathway, when we think about innovation, we'd love to see the intersection of arts and culture with movement building and how it will shape the narrative.
Great. There's a question about collaboratives and whether or not if you're chairing a collaborative, can you submit more than one application? And I just want to be clear about this again. So if you want to submit a proposal for your organization, that is great. And if you're the chair also of a collaborative, you can submit another application on behalf of that collaborative. So those are the opportunities. We have a question here about when our next open cycle will occur. This is the open cycle that will happen for through June of 2017, and then we're going to look at how it went, whether or not we met our goals, ways we may want to change it, and decide when we'll schedule the next open cycle, which will be sometime after June of 2017. Landon, here's a question for you. Will you be supporting housing for the chronically homeless, as no home can hinder a job search?
So we'll be funding the resources for housing, which includes the chronically homeless. For instance, we supported the housing bond in Alameda County, and that housing bond has a set aside of 20% of the housing bond for folks earning less than 20% of AMI, which includes chronically homeless. But it also ties that chronically homeless housing to support services as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're getting close to the end, but I think we can cover a couple more questions. How early can we submit our application? Do we have to wait until the January deadline? No, you do not. We would be happy to take your application as soon after we open in January. As you would like to submit, that would be great. Keep in mind the Rapid Response Fund for Movement Building opens tomorrow, and that's on a rolling basis, so you can submit that at any point. And then we have a question about if an organization applies for a multi-year grant, is it possible that you might only fund the project for just 1 year? And yes, we might need to do that. We're going to be juggling what we expect to be a lot of requests for multi-year to figure out a combination of how we're able to support multi-year projects and how we're able to meet some immediate goals that we'll want to meet for the current year. And then as a final question, we have whether or not we'll be supporting rental subsidies as part of a housing aftercare program. Actually, what I'm going to recommend you'll have submitted some questions like that one that are pretty specific to your organization, and I'm going to encourage you. We'll take that question as well as others through our programs at sff.org. So email us again if you have questions either as a result of either a result of today or once the guidelines are posted. And actually someone just submitted one. Francesca, I need you to answer this quickly. If a project revolves around environment, education, and seeks to impact low-income people and people of color, where will the foundation or will the foundation be willing to fund that, and which pathway?
Yes, historically we did have 5 separate areas of environment, education, health, arts and culture, and community development. We have restructured into these 3 pathways with 1 door, so you can still submit if you focus on those specific issue areas, but they will need to align with the new guidelines, which will be posted the week of December 5th.
Great. Okay, I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. As I mentioned, the entire call and the frequently asked questions will all be posted on our website. And you can continue to use the programs at sff.org to ask us questions. And again, that's programs at sff.org to ask us questions. We're going to send out an email to all of you when the new guidelines are posted, and we'll continue to keep you updated through the website, in emails, and posts, so you can continue to track our progress, and we can continue to communicate with you as it happens, and keep you informed about ways you can get engaged, apply for a grant, or participate in a program here at the San Francisco Foundation. We're really honored to be working with all of you as we seek to advance racial and economic equity across the Bay Area. And again, thank you very much for joining us today.